14 away from 9 o'clock. It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS 101.1 FM, AM 1160, and WCCSradio.com. Bob Fulton is in the studio with us. Bob, of course, for many, many years with the Indiana Gazette and writing in a number of different publications. And he's written this new book. It's called Burial at Home Plate, an Oddball History of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Our conversation this morning is brought to you by Marcus & Mack, voted best personal injury law firm in the Best of Indiana County contest. Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. Bob, good morning.
Good morning, Todd.
It's good to have you with me. I'll tell you what, I could not imagine putting a book like this together and not saying to myself about 1,000 times, did I already write this part? Because there's so much in it. And your computer desk just must be crammed with all kinds of papers and snippets and things.
Actually, most of the material I have is that we have a little sunroom, and there's a corner there where I have folders. And each year has a folder, and they are crammed with papers.
I bet.
To overflowing.
I tell you what, you did so much work on this book. It had to have been fun to write, to go through all of this old material. I don't know how long you've been collecting some of this stuff. And then, of course, the new research that you have to do. The format of the book is, it's just what it says. It's an oddball history of the Pittsburgh Pirates, all kinds of great, sometimes trivial and sometimes just fascinating snippets about the Buccos.
And the funny thing was that the title Burial at Home Plate refers to an 1887 incident when the Pirates held their home opener, and their catcher, Fred Carroll, had a pet monkey who had become sort of a team mascot. Its name is lost to history. Nobody knows. But the monkey died just before the season, so they had a pregame ceremony and buried the monkey beneath home plate so that Fred Carroll would be close to it always.
There you go. I don't think people realize the name of that monkey was Kevin Polkovich. Where do you go when you're talking about a book like this? I'm such a fan of the 60s era Pirates, and not just because they had the coolest uniforms going. But the 60s, Matty Alou was my very first favorite Pirate, and by golly, Matty makes it into the book, of course.
I love Matty Alou. When they brought him over from San Francisco, he had been a terrible hitter, and Harry Walker was the manager in '66, and he had been a batting champion. Mm-hmm. And so he sort of retooled Matty's approach at the plate, and he won the batting title that first year with the Pirates. Yeah,
he basically turned him into what later became Omar Moreno.
Without the speed on the bases.
Yeah, without that part. But when you think about putting together a book such as this, the materials that you have gathered down through the years, and is that how you did it? Basically, was with newspapers and with other sources that you were just able to gather stuff up with the intent to write a book like this?
Well, through the years, in my work with the Gazette, the Pirates used to have old-timers games, and former players would come back, mm-hmm. and as a reporter, we had access. We could ask them. I remember Mace Brown, who had thrown the pitch that pretty much lost the pennant for the Pirates in 1938, and he must have been late 80s, 90s by then. I remember discussing that with him. Mm-hmm. So a lot of personal interviews. But some of the older items, you're talking about 19th century, and to go back into old newspapers, that's a fun journey.
Yeah.
You sort of get to relive the moments as they happened. And one of the interesting things, sometimes I just stumbled across things. Mm-hmm. In 1894, the Pirates were playing in Cincinnati, and there's a funny item where one of the Cincinnati players hit a ball into the left field bleachers, which back then were in play. So two of the Pirates' outfielders go after the ball. Some fans sort of get in their way, impede their progress. And one of them bent down to pick up the ball, and a Cincinnati fan, who was identified in the newspaper reports, pulled a gun. So the Cincinnati player wound up with an inside-the-park home run.
It was a different kind of a ball game back then, wasn't it? I was telling folks this morning about one of the items I read this morning about the time the Pirates offered their managerial job to John Wooden.
Yes, that was a surprise find.
Yeah.
And I can't even remember now where I did read that. He had won his first championship at UCLA, and it was 1964. And when Danny Murtaugh stepped down in 1964, Joe L. Brown was the general manager and happened to know John Wooden. His father, Joey Brown, had been an actor in Hollywood, and just decided to offer him a job. And John Wooden turned it down. He thought he wouldn't be respected by players since he had never played or coached baseball. And he went on to win, 10 championships at UCLA in basketball?
Yeah, something like that.
Did pretty well.
Crazy. Yeah. He did okay for himself. It was pretty amazing. And he actually kept the clip out of a newspaper.
He kept it. I guess a lot of people did not want to believe the story, so he kept it in his wallet until it was this little crumbled yellow piece of paper.
Even John Wooden did things like that. That's amazing. I met a guy about 25 years ago, and all I remember about him, he was an old man at the time, and I had occasion to meet him a couple of times. His first name was Evan. I have no idea what his last name was. But he told me a story about when he was a kid back in the 1950s. And Honus Wagner had, of course, been retired for many, many years and was nearing the end of his life. And every year, every spring, Honus Wagner would check himself into the hospital in Pittsburgh and treat it as basically a spa. He wouldn't do anything, and the nurses had to wait on him hand and foot for about 2 weeks. And he never got out of bed. He just laid there watching this new thing called television and having the time of his life. And this would happen every single year. He had no recognized illness. They all knew that. And so this guy, his dad, knew this and knew Honus and actually took him up and introduced him to Honus Wagner.
There are several unusual stories about Honus Wagner in the book. One is he had a dog named Jason Weatherby. And Jason would be with him in the clubhouse, and Honus would go out, play the game, come back in, take Jason home. And there was one game where Honus had been injured, so he was coaching at first base, and he got thrown out because he argued a call at first base. So he comes into the clubhouse, and the dog the account that I read, the dog sort of looks at him quizzically like, "Why are you here? The game's still going on." And Honus told him he had been thrown out. Well, the dog ran onto the field, ran at the two umpires. And, Jason Weatherby was a funny story because when Honus lived in Carnegie, Jason would go down to the local hardware store, and he had an account there. He would pick out a toy he wanted, and they would put it on Honus's account because Jason had taken another toy.
Oh, some of the tidbits that you come up in this wonderful book. Again, it's called Burial at Home Plate-An Oddball History of the Pittsburgh Pirates. So when you consider the Pirates and your long career, there are some great Ralph Kiner stories. The one with him and Janet Leigh is a tremendous one. Did you ever get a chance to talk to Ralph?
No, I never did.
Yeah, but that's a wonderful story, though.
It is, and the funny thing was he did date Janet Leigh briefly when they were filming Angels in the Outfield at Forbes Field. And then Tony Curtis, who had also been dating Janet Leigh, found out and rushed back from Europe where he was filming a movie. Next thing you know, they're engaged. Well, years later, Ralph Kiner is at some function, and Jamie Lee Curtis is there. So he goes up to her and he says, "I don't know if you know this, but I used to date your mother." She leaps from her seat and says, "Daddy, I finally found you."
That's tremendous. And Kiner was such a colorful guy anyway. So there's wonderful stories about Ralph Kiner, about all of our favorite Pirates from down through the years. What were the ones to you that you didn't hear before that absolutely delighted you?
Oh,
that's a heck of a question. I know. Throw that out.
How about the 3-foot triple?
Oh yeah.
In 1950, they were playing the Phillies, and one of the Phillies players hit a sky-high pop-up in front of home plate, Bill Nicholson. And the third baseman charged in. He collided with the catcher, and the ball rolled into foul territory. Meanwhile, Bill Nicholson rounds the bases, ends up at third. And it's the 3-foot triple. That's how far it went in front of home plate.
Yeah, of course, you can offset that as well with the 400-foot bunt.
Yeah, Bob Robertson. I think fans will remember the 1971 World Series when Danny Martol ordered him to bunt. He either missed the sign or ignored it, and instead he hit a 3-run homer.
Yeah.
And the Pirates were down 2-0 in that series, and that home run sort of sparked their comeback.
Yeah, it was a pretty amazing episode during the 71 World Series. Those teams of the 70s, of course, the lumber company teams, and all of the fun that was built around Garner and Parker and their byplay, and it was so much fun. They had so many colorful characters in the team. Richie Hebner was my favorite growing up. He had the shoes where he had terrible bunions, so he would cut that part of his shoe off. But then to stay within uniform requirements, he would take a magic marker and color his white socks black where the hole was. It's just great stories from those teams of the 70s.
Richie Hebner actually had a great comment. The Pirates were rained out in a game in Houston in 1976 at the Astrodome, the first ever indoor rainout, because there had been torrential rains. People couldn't get to the ballpark. And Hebner had said later, when I tell people that story, they look at me like I have 3 eyeballs.
Richie Hebner was a cool dude. I remember his off-season job as a grave digger. And well, it was a different era. And the wonderful thing about this book is you bring all of those eras together between 2 covers. It's called Burial at Home Plate, an Oddball History of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Bob Fulton with us this morning. Bob, where are people going to get their hands on this?
They can get it at the co-op store at IUP, also at the Book Nook, and it's also available online.
Yeah. And I'm sure that you wouldn't mind signing a copy or two.
No, I'm willing. I don't know if I can sign it. My writing is a little illegible, but I can print it for you.
There you go. Bob Fulton, thanks so much for the visit. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Todd.
It is the voice of Indiana County. It's WCCS 101.1 FM, AM 1160, and WCCSradio.com. Fox News coming up next at the top of the hour. We follow that with news from our WCCS newsroom with Josh Woodison. He'll get us an update on that fire. Parkwood Road at 422. It's a vehicle fire, pickup truck on fire there. Indiana firefighters scrambled about a half an hour ago.